Hello and welcome back to PCS Electronics Test Bench. Today on the bench I am discussing a problem with temperature sensors. I've had 3 calls in the last couple weeks for people who have had their inverters damaged by their temperature sensors. You wouldn't think that should happen. It really probably shouldn't happen, but I'm going to tell you how to avoid it. And it specifically is for the Xantrex Freedom 458. It would also mean the Heart Interface Freedom Combi, which is the same unit. But this may be true of other units as well. The Magnum Energy product, there's the better temperature sensor for that. I suppose it could have an issue as well. So the problem is that if voltage ever goes through this wire to your temperature sensor port, it will destroy the inverter. These are temperature sensors. They are not conductors of current. This tab is supposed to be isolated from the wires in here. So this tab is supposed to be isolated. It's supposed to simply transmit the temperature of the battery into this housing, or in this case into this area here where it has a thermistor or some sort of RTD circuit that picks up the temperature. It's not supposed to be electrically connected. It's just supposed to report the temperature over these wires. And then there's the stick-on kind, which really you should never have a problem with, because that one is not connected to the battery posts. So here is the problem, and the problem is that these are connected to the battery posts. What happens is one of two things happens with these. Sometimes corrosion gets inside, it eats up the connections, and one of the wires inside will end up touching the metal. And in that case, the inverter just blows up and you don't know why. In theory, I guess the same thing can happen with this one, because these are often bolted to the positive terminal on the battery. And in fact, that's where the manufacturer intended them to go, either on the positive or the negative. Sometimes it'll even show in the manual that they go to the positive, even though this does not conduct any power to anything. But that leads to the problem. If this ever corrodes inside and shorts out, then it blows up your inverter. Another thing I have seen is where, again, corrosion eats all this up. The wire comes out, like when they're servicing the batteries or replacing the batteries. This wire will come out, accidentally brush up against a positive post, and boom, the inverter's fried. So this is a real problem. I recently got back from training where we went into training for both Schneider Electric products, which now includes Xantrex, and Magnum Energy products. And I discussed this problem while I was there and asked about it. And the consensus there was that, you know what, don't bolt these to your battery terminals. They don't need to be there, and it can lead to this problem. So what they're suggesting is this just needs to be in the compartment with the batteries to pick up the air temperature. It doesn't need to be on the battery terminal. The original theory, I believe, for on the terminal is that the engineers felt that when the battery heats up inside, that temperature gets transmitted to these terminals, and therefore these will pick up the actual temperature inside the battery. But the difference between what's going on from here to here and the air temperature, it's not going to make that big a difference. It really is just the system wants to know is it 110 degrees outside or is it 30 degrees outside, so it can adjust the charger accordingly. It doesn't have to be so super precise. It just needs to know the air temperature that the batteries are being subjected to. So you need to remove these from the positive terminals. Just put them on, you can put them on the wall behind the battery. The last one I installed, I actually screwed to the ceiling of the battery compartment and just had it up there. If you have some cable harnesses going through the battery compartment, that are not battery cables, but just like a wire harness. You could cable tie it to those just to get it up in the area but off of the battery. You don't really want to put it on the battery wires themselves, and this is also a problem with putting it on the terminal, is that the terminal and the wires get hot. They can actually heat up, and what that does is it puts that temperature into the sensor, and you can get an over temp fault even though you're not really over temp on the batteries. So to review, normally this sensor is plugged in right here, and on the Xantrex units and heart interface units that look like this, it's marked TSC, so that's your battery sensor. On the other end, for the Xantrex unit, it's going to look something like this. It may look something like this. These are designed to literally be stuck to the side of the battery, and so that there's not a problem with that. But again, they don't really have to be on the batteries. The problem you run into is when the batteries are serviced, when they remove them and replace them, then these things get handled, and possibly this wire could get ripped out, and then if it touches something, then you're having a problem. I'll show you a board that came in. This is what happens to the boards. This one's obviously dirty because it came out of a unit that was fairly old. But this right here, that's the main processor chip with a hole blown through it. And that's because the sensor touched down on the positive terminal. And it came in, I don't know if you can see it in this shot, but came in right through this trace. You can see the trace is kind of cooked, and the processor just goes boom. And sometimes when that happens, it will actually send signals out to the inverter and cause the inverter itself to blow up. So not only do you lose this board, you lose the main power board, and when that happens, the whole unit pretty much at that point's worthless. It would cost way too much money to repair it. So if you see this in your battery compartment, be careful you don't touch it to anything on the positive rail. I wouldn't even touch it to the negative rail. I would get it off of there, mount it to the wall, to the ceiling, somewhere where it won't pick up any heat from anywhere else. I know on some diesel pushers that I've worked with, the wall behind the battery compartment, it was a metal wall, and on the other side of the wall is the engine, and even the exhaust manifold is pretty close, so the back wall actually got pretty hot. So you wouldn't want to put it on something like that. You want to try and find a spot that would be close to the air temperature. Okay, so that's the warning. You've been forewarned. So I've even had people who thought this was a conductor, and when the wires came out, because they corroded and they came out or they got pulled out, they tried to fix it by stripping off all the wires. They wrapped all the wires together and they resoldered them to this ring, and then they put it back on the positive terminal battery, and boom, the inverter blew up. So don't mistake this for a conductor. It's not. It's a temperature sensor. It'd be nice if Xantrex had put their name on it somewhere, like the Magnum. At least the Magnum one, you can tell this is something different. It says Magnum on it. You could look it up and say, what is this thing? And same with this model here. It says Xantrex. But these are the ones that are causing the problems. So just be careful. Okay, well that's it for today. I hope that's helpful, and we'll see you on the next video.